They say that trauma rooms are filled with people who had accidents in the home. Well, I was traumatised and at home, but I strongly suspected it was no accident. I could get no Wi-Fi service or phone data on the same morning an anti-capitalist protest was expected in the city. Funny that, innit? I snapped open my cupboard, crackled open a cereal box and popped the lid off a plastic jug of milk that I had bought the day before. Not like the old days when I would rob a glass pint off a doorstep to go with my breakfast of smack, crack and pot. But that's a different story. This is a story about a very dark period of my life. A story about the time I went nearly half a day without internet. I sat in front of my TV and started to munch, feeling quite angry I'd been thrown off my usual morning's routine of checking various inboxes and reading my horoscope as I had my coffee. I won't mention what brand I drink. I wish I could say it was fair trade, but I cannot afford fair trade products. Well, what I mean is I can't afford all the extras that I needed to go with them. I would have to change my entire wardrobe, or I would look like a phony. You don't see people posting pictures of themselves eating a bar of fair trade chocolate dressed in Primark or Nike, do you? Funny that, innit? I like my TV shows like I like my memes. Short and to the point. Therefore, I find the advertisements are the easiest things to watch, especially when I have just woke up. Not that I ever use anything that is advertised. The television may be the keystone around which our modern culture has been built, but rarely does it provide solutions for our modern problems. You don't see ads for things we desperately need on telly, do you? Like job opportunities, for instance. Oh, I tell a lie. There has been 2 suggestions for employment I have seen advertised on TV. A career as a teacher or a career in the military. A job where you lie to kids or a job where you kill kids. A choice of being thrown into an opium-fuelled war zone where the hate is split into so many fractions you don't even know who the real enemy is. Or if you don't fancy teaching at an inner-city high school, you could try the army. That just looks like a bunch of estate agents on a team bonding weekend. If you believe the ads. They don't show you 20-year-old lads with missing limbs talking of how lucky they were to hop away relatively unscathed, or 20-year-old widows weeping beside fresh graves on the ads, do they? Funny that, innit? Telly switched on, and I'm greeted with the sight of someone who wishes people to follow him in an almost biblical sense and vote for him in a pointless popularity contest called an election. None of the contestants have any talent, and they all give the same insincere answers to the same irrelevant questions. But I suppose I will have to vote for one of them, or watching the news for the next 3 months would be like sitting through the final score when you've not got a bet on. I don't think this event will be remembered as a great turning point in history, as all the indications suggest it will be won by either Labour or Conservatives this time round. Funny that, innit? I can't be bothered listening to him, as it's most probably all lies. Well, I know that's a little harsh. I do feel the odd snide remark politicians get for being liars is a little unfair. Because if you're a murderer and a paedophile, you would have to lie all the time, I would imagine. An honest person may be able to run a country, but would no doubt fail at masterminding a satanic human trafficking ring. And these things have to be taken into account when the next bunch of puppets that pretend to rule us are picked by those that rule us. So if you're worried about the integrity of your local MP because he once got caught lying on an expenses form, maybe you're not looking at the bigger picture. Sure, it is terrible when it happens, but criticising a politician for lying is like criticising a shark for eating a child in the sea after he'd raped him on a Cornish coast. It's in their nature. I switched channels. I thought I'd got lucky and caught some adverts when I saw a man looking sadly at the camera and instantly recognised him as African, as he was wearing a Chelsea FC shirt that was 3 seasons old. I thought at first it was an ad for a charity. I have a soft spot for all charities, as when I worked in sales and marketing, I always found it easier to beg money from people's hearts than to sell shit to their brain. I realised I was wrong when he started talking and still no phone number had appeared on the screen. He didn't sound Scottish, but it was like a Glaswegian was talking at me, as he had no idea what he was saying, but I could tell he was angry about something. And for some incomprehensible reason, he seemed convinced I could understand every word he said. So I just did what I do at open mic poetry nights when I'm clueless of somebody's message. I gave him the benefit of doubt that what he was saying probably was deep and meaningful, as none of it rhymed, and carried on watching him. Things started to make sense soon enough when the sound of his voice was faded out and somebody started to translate. I missed what the translator was saying at first. I was thinking I could have done a better job of editing this myself. The translation could have started as soon as the interviewee started talking. They've wasted about 20 seconds there. I reached for my phone and had started in my mind to compose a 140 character opinion on this, thinking to maybe save around 30 of them to mention I had seen nothing else worth mentioning so far in the 3 or 4 minutes of my morning viewing, when I envisioned some smugster claiming it was done purposely, perhaps to fill out the time needed for the show, and maybe the bosses of the editor I had just dissed online were very pleased with the job done. I doubted very much that was the case, but somebody tweeting a reply along those lines might make himself look smart, especially if someone else reinforced it with a retweet, and that would make me look stupid. Then even worse, I realised somebody may point out that just because I did not understand him, perhaps there were people watching who did, like in Glasgow maybe, and flag my tweet for racism. I snatched my hand away from my phone, feeling relieved we have not quite reached a point of technology where your phone will read your mind and tweet your every thought before you even have it, when I remembered, of course, I had no internet. Well then, all of a sudden my desire to exercise my birthright to speak without fear was greater than my fear of speaking freely, and I was unafraid of looking stupid or hateful on the internet. I was going to be even more offensive. Perhaps say the editor in discussion was no doubt a woman, as the job done is so shit. And I did not care what anybody thought about that. I could be labelled a hater of puppies for all the difference it made to me. I needed to tweet like I had never tweeted before. But I had the look of a virgin budgie that had inexplicably lost his voice on the first day of mating season and was feeling just as frustrated. The switching off and on had not worked so far, so I took my battery out of my phone, unplugged my router as well as taking the wire out of the back. I then went under my stairs to switch off the power to the house just to make sure, but when all was plugged in and switched back on, there had been no change in status, and by the time my Wi-Fi came back online, my balls had gone offline, and with them my desire to rebel against the self-policed PC online culture. Funny that, innit? As my TV came back on, I was greeted by a screen that read, "Welcome to part 2. Great. Just missed some adverts. This day just kept getting worse. Turns out they also have an election coming up in this African country, and the reason the fella was as high as the ISS on blood pressure in the first half is because a band of militia came through his village, machine gunned it in half, and fired rocket-propelled grenades at anything that moved. Apparently this is a common way for local MPs to canvass support from their constituents over there. I don't think they have quite got the hang of democracy yet. They were introduced to democracy fairly recently, about the same time as they were introduced to Toyota pickups and rail lines, waiting times, tin mines, landmines. They were all sold mobiles once they'd paid for the landlines. McDonald's, Coke, 7-Elevens, a ruling class driving gold Rolls Royces with AK-47s to quell dissenting voices. Education in a language they didn't understand, and their first generation without a connection to their land. The dollar, poverty, Western agricultural methods, famine, running water, floods, vaccines for diseases they'd never had, and a shitload of new diseases they'd never had before. Funny that, innit? Not much chance of machine gun or rocket-propelled grenade attacks round here. Knives are the weapon of choice for the warlords in my neighbourhood. And in every grenade attack down my street this year, the grenades have been thrown by hand. But that was not the point. Maybe if my internet was working, I would find time to worry about an unlikely, sudden, violent death, or even empathise with TV people. But I had more relevant concerns. The night before I had posted a poem online, and that morning I realised there is a comma I needed to change to an and. I was worried people who read it that day would never read the final edit, the real version, the way I'd always intended it to be read. I was worried that a girl, who has never messaged me, could have messaged me, and now thought I was ignoring her. I was worried my view count might not go up at all that day on my YouTube vids. If I wasn't watching them, who would? One of them got just 4 views the day before, and at least 17 of them was me. Funny that, innit? It was dinner time now on the telly. What was left of his family left their chores and gathered into what was left of their dining room to the left of their outdoor kitchen to dine on what had been left for them by the raiders, whose only understanding of left and right wings are formation on a one-sided battlefield. I guess what to eat is one worry I don't have today. Not much point going to the trouble of cooking an organic ration chicken dinner for one if I can't post a picture of it to Instagram. I might as well have what he's having. A few roots from his failed harvest of GM crops that claims they would repel pests without the need for pesticides, but didn't. They also failed to produce seeds, so he has to buy more next season. Funny that, innit? And what looks like a bit of undercooked monkey arm on his plate. All I wanted for tea was a photograph of it. He's got a crew from Channel 4 filming him dine, and he's still got a face on him like he's chewing an undercooked monkey arm. Some people are never happy. The translator asked the viewers if we could live on 47 pence a day. Probably not, I thought, as I took a huge drag on my morning spliff and filled my lungs with at least 47p's worth of smoke in one go. If you also take the 90% tax price of the tobacco into the joint into account, the only part of that spliff that wanted to kill me, and no doubt one day will, without ever having the decency to get me high first. The only non-edible yet consumable plant I can think of, not deemed illegal by those wise ones that make their laws. Funny that, innit? The camera zoomed in on the now youngest member of our man's family, and our translator turned narrator and told how this boy lost his right foot in an explosion that killed his younger sister. I saw the look of lost innocence in his eyes that in an ideal world no child would ever have. They told of a mind stuck in some ethereal place trapped between an illusional reality and a fake reality. Yeah, I could tell that kid was looking at a screen. I looked at the angle of his shoulder and the position of his head, made a quick triangulation calculation and worked out he was looking at the palm of his hand. Or whatever he had in the palm of his hand. This lad has lost his foot and half of his family, but not his dignity, I thought, as I realised, like any self-respecting teenager, this kid was looking at his phone as he spoke to an adult. The camera moved down to show the viewers his injury. As the shot passed his hands, I saw I was right. He was on his phone. I also noticed he was an Inter Milan fan, which I found strange with his dad being a Chelsea fan. Only in Africa. But it was what I saw on his phone that made me pebble dash my TV screen with a gobful of crispy rice. Some of it is still plastered on with full fat milk. It was just a split-second peek. But I had gone so long without a piece of the action myself, the sight of somebody else doing it sent me into a jealous frenzy. And I'm ashamed to admit I lost control of all bodily functions and I blurted out the words, "You lucky little bastard," because I'd just seen he was on fucking Facebook. It was unfortunate timing. The camera was zoomed in on his stump when I shouted this at him. I feel bad about that. But over the last half hour, I'd had it explained to me that this place was hell on earth. So imagine how I felt when I realised that even people in hell were having a better day than me. Don't get me wrong, I was feeling as grateful as a Westerner can get, but at that moment, I did not need to walk 6 grueling steps to my tap to fill a jug with boring water. I needed to watch a sleeping cat fall off a shelf. Funny cats, innit? I sat there, despairingly clutching empty space, knowing 5G was all around me. I could almost taste its sweet radiation in the air. I at first pleaded, then commanded, all Wi-Fi travelling through my house to get into my phone and work. Just fucking work! I slumped to my knees, eyes back on the telly, and just as I was thinking I would give anything to swap places with somebody from that village just for this one day. Do you know what the narrator asked the viewers? You won't believe this, but he said, "Would you swap places with anybody from this village, even for just one day?" I thought, whoa, that was fucking weird. It was clear by his tone that it was a rhetorical question, and by, the whole context of it all. Well, he did not ask that question to a wrong person at the right time, for at that moment it felt like God himself had spoken to me through my TV and had given me the message to change my fucking attitude. I wanted to type LOL in big letters of embarrassment for having such a mockable thought. But what would the point of that have been? It's not the words that make a story, it's the sharing of those words. A scream is not piercing until it finds the spine to chill. And if a tree LOLs when he's too deep in the woods to get a signal, no one will hear him fall. I realised the time had come to change channels. Yes, adverts. There was an ad for one of those companies that will fly your camera far away from the house you spend your whole life working for, and even take you with it so you can keep minutes on the minutes of happiness your hours of misery have paid for. The ad had a song playing on it, and when I heard that song, I was filled with joy. Not because I like the song, I hate the Strokes, but because I was reminded of the 90s. Not that it's a 90s song, it was released in 2001, but it has a 90s vibe, and most of my past is a blur anyway, so a lot of music just sounds like Oasis to me. But for the first time that day, I felt happy, because I loved the 90s, and we didn't have the internet then. Funny that, innit?